Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? This is Enrique of Spanish United. Today we have a very special guest on the show. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Good afternoon, Enrique. My name is Ramiel G Shamwel, and I have been involved in the Assyrian community throughout my life, and less actively so in recent years as I pursued my academic dreams and aspirations. And I was matriculating a doctoral degree. And now that I am free of that and I've finished that, I look forward to again serving the local Assyrian community in Southern California.
Awesome. That's wonderful to hear. As we had spoken in the email, one of the things that we would like to talk about is the Assyrian Hispanic relationship, having better dialogue and rapport between the both communities, and at the same time to establish a working relationship, because I think it will be beneficial mutually for both groups of people. So the first question of I would like to ask you is, as a member of the Syrian community, how is the relationship between the Hispanic and the relationship, I mean, between the Hispanic and the Syrian community in the United States, or at least in Southern California?
Officially, there is very little status or very little official activity in terms of Assyrian and Hispanic relations. But unofficially, it's quite to the contrary. I personally can attest that a third of the weddings that I've attended throughout my life have been interracial marriages. And all of those third that I can describe to you, for all intents and purposes, involved an Assyrian American marrying a Mexican American. And this is not entirely rare or unknown throughout the Assyrian community in Southern California. And it's sociologically not surprising either, considering the demographics of this region and the very large number of Hispanic Americans that reside here. But again, officially, that has not really existed, even though a great deal of Assyrian people actually know Mexican or Hispanic Americans. And in my case, all of the individuals I knew were Mexican Americans. But it's basically something very widespread that someone Assyrian knows someone who is Hispanic. I mean, either by marriage or by neighborhood or by employment or school somehow. And even our Assyrian American Association of Southern California, which is partially kept viable and sustainable through rental income. It's through rental income to Hispanics who are in that community, in that neighborhood, who rent the facility.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens even with some Assyrian churches and whatnot.
Right.
It's really not uncommon.
Right. And one of the things that we do in Spanish United is that not only we are trying to emphasize the matter of education and also the betterment of the Hispanic community, but at the same time, I feel that in order for the Hispanic community to be successful and have harmonious relations, they need to have established ties with other communities, especially those that are smaller and more insular, as I would say, because I feel that both communities have gone through different levels of persecution, discrimination. I don't know what the level is in the United States for Syrians, but for Hispanics, it's very high. So I think if we could establish an alliance and type of engagement and dialogue, I think it will be mutually beneficial to both parties.
I think that you touch on a very important point, because Assyrians have, and I don't know, again, myself to what extent, but I know that in the aftermath of the 9/11 tragedy, many Assyrians were mistaken for Muslims or for Arabs, were called, for example, sand, N-word, or other very, very insensitive labels, which are not entirely acceptable to mainstream society. And even in recent years, we witnessed this. Even in recent years, in the latter 2010s, as there was increased nativism and increased xenophobia in the United States, I personally, my family, my friends, witnessed events of intolerance based on our really background or our appearance as olive-skinned individuals, as people, for example, like my parents who have an accent. And if we go back in history, in recent history, I think that we can see many parallels between Assyrians and Hispanics. For example, if we go back a little farther to, the situation around World War I, it involved massacres, it involved colonialism. More contemporarily, it involves hegemony, it involves exploitation. And these are the things that we witness. I mean, if I were to discuss Mexican American culture or heritage, there is a lot of emphasis on certain Mexican presidents, for example, like who are found to be inspirational or transformational, like Benito Juarez, Francisco Madero, Lázaro Cárdenas, and to a lesser extent, Plutarco Elías Calles or Álvaro Obregón. And we see this in Assyrians, even in the aftermath of World War I, especially Assyrians in Iran, like my family, found inspiration in individuals such as Dr. Freydon Turaya, Baba Parhad, or Rabbi Ben Abd Assams, and some other individuals as well. Maybe one could even veer to say individuals like Agha Potros, if we are to compare them to how Benito Juarez transformed the conversation in Mexico at the time, and how Agha Potros transformed the conversation about Assyrian identity during his time before his martyrdom. And I think that these lines or these parallels are very important, that even someone like myself who's read books, for example, by Fred Ephrem, who is an Assyrian author, and I've been tremendously inspired by it. But I've been equally inspired by a book like Eduardo Galeano's Open Veins of Latin America, or by Gabriel Garcia Marquez's books, specifically his book 100 Years of Solitude.
Mm-hmm.
So I think these parallels definitely exist. And if we go back to the colonialism, even, that Assyrians were at one point told by the British that one idea would be to evacuate them from the Middle East, to settle them in Guyana, where they would be around other fellow refugees or vagabonds of colonialism that were transplanted and uprooted from their ancestral and indigenous homelands. But that plan never came to fruition, and it would have actually landed us in a part of South America, but a part of South America that was not specifically Hispanic, because it was in Guyana near Suriname,
Right.
An area that was basically inundated with the after effects of colonialism.
Right. The Guyanas at the time were still colonies of the Europeans.
Exactly. And I think those mentalities of what was done in Guyana, in Suriname, or even what was brought up to the Assyrians, was how, this was in the aftermath of the blood of innocents being spilled, and unfortunately not many questions being asked in the aftermath. But what it resulted was, as much of a travesty it was for those, especially the survivors, to have witnessed this, but was that noble and bejeweled lands, whether they were in Latin America or in the Middle East, were basically being treated as an inferior and backwards countryside, waiting to be annexed as though they were colonial tokens awarded after conquest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that surprised me is that prior to meeting you, I didn't even know there was an Assyrian ethnicity, because the Assyrians are mentioned in the Bible. And there's a lot of people from the ancient world that are pretty much extinct. Very few of them have survived to the modern era. And one thing that I do, because my background is an education professor and history and political science and whatnot, is that I like to learn about different cultures, different countries. And I visited St. Mary's Church, Assyrian Church of the East, over in Tarzana, and I got acquainted with the Assyrian community there, and I was able to hear the Assyrian, I mean, not the Assyrian language, the Aramaic language, which is what the Assyrians, which is the only people in the world that still speak it. And I'm
Which is the
surprised.
Assyrian language, basically.
Right, right. But it was just amazing that I was able to hear it, because I thought it was a dead language, because I come from a Jewish background and I don't speak Hebrew 100%, but I'm able to understand like maybe like 20-30%. And I was able to understand a lot of things. And when I looked at this, the Syriac, it kind of looks like a mixture of Hebrew and Arabic. When you turn it upside down, it looks Hebrew, and to the other side looks Arabic. So I think it was a very wonderful experience. At the same time, I was able to attend the Assyrian genocide memorial. I think it was in 2018, 2019, to give myself there in condolences. And I feel that it is very important that the Assyrian community understands that the Hispanic community, we are an inclusive community. As much as people don't want to understand that, we are inclusive. We're not monolithic. We are of many races, because Hispanic is not a race, it's an ethnicity. Hispanics come from all colors of the rainbow. And we're one of the few ethnicities in the world, in my opinion, that's inclusive of everybody. Because when people think of Hispanic, people think dark brown, indigenous, Roman Catholic, etc., which is nothing, that's not, which is not necessarily true. It's the majority, but it's not everyone. So I feel that it's very important that Assyrians know that we are inclusive, we are of different backgrounds, and we have Assyrians among our ranks, which many don't even know about. And I feel that Hispanics and the Armenian community, especially through Spanish United, reaching out, I think it could create a rapport, because unfortunately Hispanophobia exists in all groups. Like in the last couple of days, there was an attack against a Hispanic food vendor in San Jose that was committed by an Asian person. And it's very rare that Asians commit hate crimes, but as you know, when people have hatred, it affects everyone, all beliefs, all races, all creeds and backgrounds. So I feel it's very important that there could be more talks like this, in order to get people to break down any biases or prejudice that they may have, based on what they assume of the other person.
I believe that in respect to the Asian community, I believe that as they are, and as you know very well yourself, I spent 2 years before I started teaching, before I finished my doctoral degree. I worked at a nonprofit organization, faith-based, and I dealt with a specific ethnicity of Asian Americans on a daily basis. And altogether, I had a very positive and very optimistic looking relationship with them. But simultaneously, I do understand that because Asian Americans are considered a model minority, and this statement is probably going to sound very, very unusual, but because Asians have, up until recent years, had experienced, even though historically they had experienced significantly marginalization and disenfranchisement, but for a specific portion of history, post-World War II, up until before, let's say, several years ago, had experienced less marginalization and disenfranchisement. I think that perhaps it helps a community to suffer less, but at the same time, they're not able to witness the suffering of others as vividly as they would if they were marginalized and disenfranchised more directly themselves, such as Middle Eastern Americans have been, or Hispanic Americans have been.
Right.
And in terms of inclusiveness, it's ironic that you mentioned St. Mary's Assyrian Church of the East, because the church was relocated to Tarzana in 1998. I remember that day very, very vividly. Before that, it was located in North Hollywood in a very predominantly Hispanic community. And I actually grew up there. I was baptized when the sanctuary was located in North Hollywood in that community. My grandfather's funeral was conducted there, and his funeral rites were conducted there. And it's amazing that my late grandparents were actually founding members when the church was established there in 1980. And before that, it was actually the congregation worshipped at the Assyrian American Association of Southern California. That's where they actually worshipped in the late 70s, in 1979 or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And the Assyrian American Association of Southern California now, from what I've understood, even though I haven't been there directly, because I've been so busy, I am immunocompromised, so I've
Mm-hmm.
held off on a lot of in-person social gatherings the
Mm-hmm.
last 3 years. There is definitely a trajectory towards inclusiveness, towards seeking an understanding about inclusiveness. I know that there's been an embracing of social, racial, environmental, and economic justice. There's been an embracing of a better understanding of community, of being a community organization, of the association's place in the local neighborhood, with justice-based organizations such as the ACLU, Black Lives Matter, the Human Rights Campaign, Planned Parenthood, the International Rescue Committee. And I think if that same mindset could be applied towards, for example, let's say an organization like Unidos US,
Mm-hmm.
and other Hispanic advocacy organizations in the US, I think that will be very, very fruitful and mutually, both for not just for the association. I mean, it'll be fruitful because we're such a small community,
Mm-hmm.
for the entire Assyrian community in the SoCal region, and also for the Hispanic community here in Southern California.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because I believe that if the Hispanic community, for example, were to work together with the Syrian community, especially that the Syrian community has the capital and the Hispanics have the manpower, I think they could work wonders. One of the things that I feel is very important is that Hispanics are the largest minority in the United States, but yet we are invisible, even though we contribute a good portion of the economy. And a lot of it has to do because we're not considered a race, like I mentioned before, and also that since Hispanics have high levels of poverty and they are not in many levels of academics or science or education, they tend to be left out. And I feel that that harms the community, because when you have a community that's invisible, even though you have people that are educated and skilled, it's like many people from the elite or from the academic side, they don't want to acknowledge that they exist, even though they do exist. So that's why I feel it's very important that there needs to be more outreach between both groups, because I myself, being a Hispanic American, I've been discriminated just the fact of my background, because a lot of people assume that just because I am Hispanic, they don't think I'm educated. They don't think I have manners or ethics. They want to put you in this box, even though I fought most of my life not to be in that box. That's why I feel it's very important that Hispanics get an education, because it will help them not only in terms of having a better life, but at the same time, it will help them in their personal life as people. Because unfortunately, a lot of prejudice that people have of Hispanic people is that they don't maintain things, they don't keep things organized, even though they get paid to keep other people's things organized. But when it comes to their own home, I'm talking about the inside and the outside, they don't have it all together, and that reflects on everybody else. So I think it's very important that the Hispanic community gets educated, but at the same time, others need to acknowledge and respect that that you have people that are among Hispanics that are part of academia, that we're part of the science, we're part of the economic background and the fabric of the society, not just as workers, but also as investors, as people that own businesses, that, you know, that we need to be given our respect, because like with other groups of people, like you mentioned, they want people to respect them. They need to do the same thing for us because we've been here longer. And at the same time, again, we could be partners instead of being enemies. Because one thing that I learned working in the business world years ago is that to be successful in business, you have to build relationships with people, not just business relations, but also personal relationships. And meaning is that if you build a good relationship with someone and they trust you on a personal level, then when you are in business with them, they can trust you on a business professional level. And I think that's very important, that there needs to be better relationships between the Hispanic and the Assyrian community, not just informally, but also on a personal, spiritual, and even a academic level.
And I think these things are happening as there is a very high proportion of educated Assyrian American millennials, particularly throughout California and throughout the world, really. I think this will really either come to fruition, or if I shouldn't say it will come to fruition, I hope that it will come to fruition, and I believe it can come to fruition, because there is a much different train of thought now amongst Assyrian millennials about our place as Assyrians and about the non-Assyrians around us, because we are now looking at ourselves much more as global citizens, rather than looking at ourselves inwardly or in an insular manner. And we're looking at ourselves as individuals, or as really as partners or as pieces, in a greater picture of a world and societies that are in post-nationalism. I believe that we, as Assyrian millennials, I can say, we live as individuals who are in a post-nationalist society. Even though perhaps America is not a post-nationalist country, but or many countries that Assyrians reside in, but I believe we do look at our own contributions through that lens. And I do believe our premier focus is on being productive, or to be positive global citizens. And I think that these are concepts that were very, very different from the way our parents, when they came here, were exposed to, because they were basically unassimilated and they were really not offered many of the opportunities that we were offered. So they actually raised us in a manner to be able to think more globally, to be more conscientious of non-Assyrians around us locally. And I can say that to a great extent we are indebted to our parents, because I think that being sent to academia, to receive higher education by our parents, that was where we were instilled with these principles that we are human beings created by God, loved by God no more than other human beings. And basically given God's grace equally with other human beings. And I think that the result was that we developed this idea that we live in a post-nationalist society and that we have to look beyond simply our own. And that's why I believe that the conditions for cooperation and collaboration between the Assyrian community and the Hispanic community are very ripe.
Hmm. So one of the things that I would suggest is that there needs to be more joint Hispanic Assyrian events, joint Hispanic Assyrian meetings and conferences. One of the things that I always suggest to my people and my organization, Spanish United, is that we should do volunteer work in the community, like do food banks, food pantries, do cleanup crews. One of the things that we're trying to do right now is trying to collect funding to start a cultural center, because I think that is very much needed, because Hispanics are the only people in the entire United States, it doesn't matter if it's California, New York, whatever, that we don't have cultural centers. We don't have after school programs, while other communities have it, regardless if it's privately funded or not, they have it while we don't have it. And I remember when I was growing up back in the 90s, we used to have the Boys and Girls Club there. And for my generation, most people in my generation don't use drugs. There are those that do, but the ones that went to that program don't do it because, it helped. But when the funding was taken away because of, politics and whatever, it just created a lot of disaster, and the gangs and the crime filled in the vacuum, and that just destroyed an entire generation of young Hispanic people, especially young Hispanic men. So I feel that there needs to be more community work and more community outreach between both groups.
And again, I believe that just as we have been able to engage with so many organizations and groups, with Armenian Americans, with the ACLU, as I said, with Planned Parenthood and others, I believe if we apply that same mindset to the Hispanic community, it'll be very advantageous. And I think that the possibility does exist, because I remember even the late Melfona Ninos Aho would many times bring up certain examples of independence and of identity, and many times he would bring up Catalonia and the Catalan people. And it's really ironic that I bring him up right now, and I hope that the oceans move its ashes towards wherever a free dawn rises, if that day ever comes, from an egalitarian Azteca to motherland Assyria. And I really would hope that. And it's just something that I can't stress enough about, because even the Malfono saw Catalonia rising. He saw Scotland seek sovereignty. And
Wales,
hopefully, pardon me?
Wales, also Wales.
And Wales, he often would bring up the attempts at Scottish referendums before his passing. He passed away in 2013. And yeah, Wales could be considered in the same light. I would consider it in the same light. And I remember Rabininos Nirari, who is an Assyrian in Chicago. He many times, in discussing the perseverance and the patriotism of the Melfona Ninos Aho, he would bring up Cuba and under Fulgencio Batista and freeing itself from Fulgencio Batista. And there are contemporary Assyrians who also wrote, I remember having conversations with about that. The late Rabbi Simon Amarchas, one of them here in Los Angeles. And I remember he would mention that Rabbi Ninos Aho had been mentioned that his fervor was compared to that of the Cubans who were in the Battle of La Plata and the Battle of Las Mercedes and the Sierra Maestra Mountains,
Mm.
and also the Battle of Yaguajay. He was very fervent towards seeking liberation. And I believe that eventually, just as just as the martyrs were honored in Cuba of the La Cubre explosion, in the march to the Colón cemetery, I believe that someday our community also will be able to gather with all persecuted, whether it be Jewish, Armenian, Greek,
Puerto Ricans,
Serbians, many others, many, the indigenous in Mexico, in Chile, in many places, in Ecuador, where all those who have survived massacre and who have survived attempts at extermination will be able to one day gather all together under one space, under God's sun, under that light which really breathes life to us all. And we can celebrate our survival, and we can also empower ourselves and our descendants to actually turn that persecution into power. And I believe that we will all, someday arise and sing, as you probably heard the Chilean anthem, de pie cantar que vamos a triunfar, avanzan
yes,
fuerzas de unidad. I believe that we will all one day arise and sing, and that flags of unity will advance, and that we will all march together as one, and our song and our flags will blossom.
and the same thing, a famous quote by Filiberto Campos Rios, who was Puerto Rican nationalist, that said that Puerto Rico will not be part of Latin America until it becomes independent, So that is something that I truly believe, that when all persecuted people work together, they could strive to do a lot of things. So we are, I have 5 minutes left on my timer, but we covered a lot of things. I want to tell you, thank you so much for being on the show, Dr. Ramiel. To our listeners on Spanish United, I'm both on the Assyrian side, on my side. You could reach me out at Spanish United Facebook, Spanish United Twitter, Spanish United Instagram, Spanish United YouTube. And if there's anything that we can do, like possibly meet in the future to do like conferences or whatever between both the Assyrian and Hispanic community, I'm more than welcome in doing it in sometime in the future.
Thank you so much, Enrique. Thank you for having me, and I really hope that we can again see you at Assyrian events, and that we can be inclusive of the Hispanic community in Assyrian events, and that Assyrians can also be included and be present in Hispanic events. I believe that it'll I believe it'll be great. I'm really sorry I have to pick up a phone call right now, but thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough.
Not a problem. So as soon as I
Thank you.
finish, I will send you the link, and you can share it to wherever you want to share it. Have yourself a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.